Hello there. I'm so happy you're here with me tonight. Insomnia keeping you company? Well, now you have me too. Let's make these sleepless hours meaningful with some hushed stories, authentic experiences from real people everywhere. If you find yourself drawn to these tales, please like, comment, and subscribe so we can meet again tomorrow night. Now, let me take you away with our first story.
In the quiet community of Stella, Missouri, during the early days of November 2007, the soft evening air carried no hint of the events that would soon unfold. This small town home to fewer than 200 residents would become the center of a search that would touch many hearts and change many lives forever. On a November evening, while working her usual overnight shift at the local Walmart, a mother named Colleen had no way of knowing that her world was about to change. Her 9-year-old daughter, Rowan Ford, born on April 11, 1998, was at home under the care of her stepfather, David Spears. Rowan was the youngest of 5 children, a soft-spoken 4th grader with a fondness for reading, drawing, and riding her bicycle. She particularly enjoyed attending church, often arriving early to help the pastor set up for Sunday services. She would sit smiling quietly on the steps, waiting for him to arrive. Her bedroom was decorated in pink, reflecting her love of Barbie dolls. Despite some challenges in her young life, occasionally arriving at school with hair in need of brushing or without proper winter attire, Rowan maintained a cheerful disposition. Her teachers described her as hardworking and diligent, even in subjects she found difficult, like mathematics. One educator fondly referred to her as a little ray of sunshine, just the sweetest girl you would ever meet. Though naturally shy sometimes, hiding behind her older sister when Rowan felt comfortable enough to open up her presence seemed to brighten the entire room. Her sister would later recall, Rowan, she was something very special. There was nobody that did not like her. Rowan lived with her mother Colleen, who was 44 years old, and her 25-year-old stepfather, David, also had another child for whom he had been ordered to pay child support, though it wasn't clear if he maintained a relationship with this child. When Colleen would return home from her shifts at Walmart, Rowan would typically be waiting eager to run out to the driveway and greet her mother, asking about her day. On November 3rd, 2007, however, this familiar routine was broken. When Colleen arrived home, there was no sign of Rowan in the driveway. Proceeding inside, she found David asleep on the sofa. When asked about Rowan's whereabouts, David mentioned that she was at a friend's house, though he couldn't specify which friend. Colleen immediately wanted to notify the police, but David insisted that Rowan was visiting someone and would return. After several hours of waiting without any news, they began searching the neighborhood, but Rowan was nowhere to be found. At 6:50 p.m. that evening, Rowan was officially reported missing. An Amber Alert was issued, and a comprehensive search effort was quickly organized. Many residents of Stella joined in the search, showing the deep community connection that exists in small towns like theirs. The initial investigation focused on understanding where Rowan had been the night before and who had last seen her since Colleen had been working the overnight shift. Rowan had been in David's care. David initially told investigators that he had gone out with 2 friends, Christopher Collings and Nathan, leaving Rowan alone while she slept on her bedroom floor. He stated that he returned home around midnight, but didn't check on Rowan at that time. As the investigation proceeded, David's account changed. He later admitted to investigators that he had actually gone out a second time around 1:30 a.m., borrowing his mother's sport utility vehicle. His mother confirmed, waiting up, watching television until he returned, but she hadn't checked on Rowan. The investigators found David's changing Surrey and his reluctance to explain his whereabouts concerning Newton. County Sheriff Chris Jennings would later note, "He didn't report her missing until 8 or 10 hours after she was gone, which we thought was extremely strange. His story changed several times. We caught him in several lies." To gather more information, investigators spoke with David's friends who had been with him that evening. Nathan provided an account that aligned with some of David's statements, explaining that the three men had met at a farm where they were working, visited a liquor store, and then played pool. According to Nathan, after Colleen left for work around 8:30 p.m., Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home, and David accompanied them, which meant Rowan was left alone at the house. At Christopher's trailer, they continued drinking and also smoked marijuana. About an hour later, Nathan drove David home, taking back roads to avoid potential encounters with police. While under the influence, Nathan stated he returned to his own home by midnight on November 4th. The following day, Christopher Collings was interviewed by deputies. His account matched Nathan's, though he omitted mentioning their marijuana use. Christopher claimed that after Nathan and David left, he remained in his trailer and went to sleep, having no knowledge of Rowan's disappearance until later. As the search for Rowan continued, the FBI joined the investigation. Dozens of officers from 3 counties, along with 50 specialists. The Missouri State Highway Patrol and FBI agents participated in the search efforts. Meanwhile, investigators seized both David's vehicle and his mother's, which David had borrowed that night. Newton County deputies approached Christopher at his workplace, asking him to answer additional questions. He agreed and drove to the sheriff's office, where he consented to a polygraph test and a computer voice stress analysis. Throughout this process, Christopher maintained that he had no information about Rowan's whereabouts and offered to assist in the search. That afternoon, Wheaton Police Chief Clinton Clark encountered Christopher during a routine patrol. Chief Clark had known Christopher for 17 years, with Christopher often turning to him for guidance, including after his mother's passing. During their interaction, Christopher mentioned Rowan's disappearance and his involvement in the search efforts. Chief Clark noted that Christopher seemed unusually agitated. After reporting this conversation to the FBI chief, Clark was asked to continue communicating with Christopher, as they believed he might have relevant information. Christopher told the FBI that he suspected David was involved in Rowan's disappearance and offered to wear a recording device to help the investigation. He also suggested potential locations to search for Rowan. Meanwhile, the community was deeply affected by her disappearance. A teacher named Tammy Marshall remembered the last time she saw Rowan on the day she vanished. Noticing Rowan's hair needed brushing, Tammy had spent 30 minutes before class helping her arrange it into a neat ponytail. Later that day, Tammy observed Rowan skipping by herself, appearing content and carefree. David, Christopher, and Nathan were considered persons of interest, as they were the last known individuals to see Rowan. Investigators described Christopher as cooperative, concerned, and polite during their interactions. That evening, he visited Colleen to inquire about the search progress and offer assistance. Christopher and David had been friends for some time with Christopher, even living in the family's basement for several months earlier that year. During that period, he had helped Rowan with her schoolwork, and she had affectionately called him Uncle Chris. Christopher was also a father to 3 children under the age of 10 who lived with their mother in Arkansas. In October 2007, Christopher had relocated to his family's farm, living in a trailer on the property. By November 6th, 3 days after Rowan was reported missing, the investigation was focusing more intently on David Spears. The house had been searched thoroughly, and David had undergone multiple interviews. That evening, Christopher visited Chief Clark's office, mentioning that he had spoken with the FBI and provided suggestions for search locations. Chief Clark sensed that Christopher seemed troubled and observed that he avoided eye contact, which was uncharacteristic of him. After informing the FBI about this conversation, they suggested that if Christopher needed to confess, he would likely do so to Chief Clark, and encouraged the chief to continue assisting with the investigation. On November 7th, Christopher went to the Newton County Sheriff's Department to meet with the FBI. He provided a DNA sample and consented to searches of his home and a safe he kept at David's residence. During this interview, Christopher informed the FBI that an alibi David had provided for the night of Rowan's disappearance was not accurate. As the questioning continued, Christopher became increasingly nervous and emotional when discussing the missing child. He eventually told the agents that he would no longer speak with them if they were going to suggest he was involved in her disappearance. And the interview concluded. That evening, Christopher visited Chief Clark again, expressing distress about his earlier interview with the FBI. He mentioned he might dummy up about further information and considered getting a lawyer. Chief Clark acknowledged his right to legal representation, but emphasized the importance of helping find Rowan. Christopher responded, "If I have anything else to say, I'll talk to you." Understanding the importance of proper procedure, Chief Clark reminded Christopher of his Miranda rights. After Christopher signed a waiver form, they continued their conversation. When Chief Clark expressed his belief that Christopher seemed troubled and asked if he knew anything about what had happened to Rowan, Christopher began crying, stating that he would never harm her and that he loved her. At that moment, someone entered the room, interrupting their conversation, and Christopher quickly left. Chief Clark informed the FBI about this interaction, suggesting that Christopher appeared to be approaching a breaking point and might soon seek legal counsel. The following day, Chief Clark had a more detailed discussion with the FBI about Christopher, his family background, and their relationship. Chief Clark expressed his belief that Christopher knew something about Rowan's fate, but thought that finding her body would be necessary first. The FBI indicated that when Rowan was found, they wanted Chief Clark to be the one to speak with Christopher. A significant development occurred the next day. David and Christopher had both previously worked for Newton County Coroner Mark Bridges at his automotive business, Christopher as a mechanic, and David in sales and occasional mechanical work. Mark had been on duty when Rowan was reported missing and recalled that David had first contacted him, then possibly because Mark had formerly served as sheriff. Mark remembered David repeatedly suggesting that Rowan might be at a friend's house. On November 8th, Mark spent the day with David searching for Rowan with the FBI, having equipped Mark with a recording device and arranged aerial surveillance. During their search, Mark asked David to consider where Christopher might have taken Rowan, if he was responsible. After some thought, David led Mark to Fox Cave, described as more of a sinkhole than a traditional cave. Mark noticed some concerning items at the location and felt compelled to search the cave more thoroughly. sensing that David had brought him there for a specific reason. The FBI then contacted the McDonald County Sheriff's Department, and on the morning of November 9th, around 8:00 a.m., deputies Mike Hall and Jake Bowles conducted a search of Fox Cave, approximately 20 feet below ground. They discovered a child's body on a ledge. Newton County Sheriff Chris Jennings later commented, "I wasn't there when the body was discovered, but I don't think anyone had any question that it was a homicide." The subsequent autopsy confirmed that Rowan had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Her body showed signs of decomposition, minor scrapes and bruises inflicted before death, and significant facial injuries, likely caused by being thrown into the sinkhole. When Chief Clark learned from the news that Rowan's body had been found, he was informed by his office that Christopher had been there looking for him. After contacting the FBI, Chief Clark was instructed to locate Christopher and inform him about the discovery of Rowan's body. Unable to find him initially, Chief Clark eventually received a call from Christopher, who expressed feeling threatened and nervous, mentioning that he had been driving around trying to evade what he believed was surveillance. Chief Clark arranged to meet with him and then drove him to the police department in his patrol car. During this journey, Chief Clark informed Christopher, "Well, son, it's over. We found Rowan's body this morning." Upon hearing this, Christopher's eyes welled with tears and his head dropped. Chief Clark, believing that David had done something and Christopher knew about it, urged him to tell the truth. Christopher appeared surprised by this assumption, preferring not to speak in the presence of others at the department. Christopher and Chief Clark drove to Muncie Bridge, a few miles outside of Wheaton, after informing other law enforcement officers of their destination. Upon arrival, Christopher extended his hands, anticipating being handcuffed. When told this wasn't necessary, he replied, "For what I'm about to tell you, you will." Sitting on the slope by the bridge, Christopher recounted the same story he had shared throughout the previous week, up until the point when Nathan and David left his trailer. He explained that knowing they would take back roads to avoid detection for drunk driving, he realized he could quickly go to Rowan's house and retrieve her before they returned. Driving on the highway, the more direct route, he soon arrived at the property. After using the bathroom, he entered Rowan's bedroom, picked her up as she slept, and carried her to his truck. She remained asleep during the journey to his trailer. He avoided speaking to prevent her from recognizing his voice. After sexually assaulting her, Christopher claimed he intended to return Rowan home holding her arms and positioning her to face away from him as they walked to prevent her from seeing him. However, she looked over her shoulder and recognized him, the man who had once helped her with homework, whom she had called Uncle Chris. Christopher said he panicked, found some rope in a nearby pickup truck, and used it to strangle Rowan. Aware of the severity of his actions, he placed her body in his truck bed, initially planning to dispose of her body from Muncie Bridge. He reconsidered, fearing she would be discovered too quickly. After driving around contemplating where to leave her body, he eventually decided on Fox Cave. He threw her body into the sinkhole and attempted to cover the entrance with branches, but the opening was too large. Upon returning home, he noticed the blood on his clothes and mattress. He gathered Rowan's pajama bottoms, underwear, the rope, and his own clothes and burned them in a wood stove to destroy evidence. He then rolled up the mattress and placed it in a drum, initially planning to burn it, but concerned that such a large fire would attract attention. He moved the drum to the barn and set it alight there. Chief Clark accompanied Christopher back to the police department, where Christopher repeated his statement to deputies from Berry County, Newton County, and the FBI after being read his rights again. He also provided consent for his property to be searched. Later at the Berry County Sheriff's Department, he gave another recorded statement, adding that he had been deeply remorseful and had spent the afternoon crying intensely. The investigators who had previously suspected that David had killed Rowan and Christopher knew about it, were surprised by this confession. With this new information, they questioned David again, and he provided a different account, now implicating himself. According to David, he had checked Rowan's room, and finding her missing knew that Christopher had taken her to his house. David claimed that upon arriving at Christopher's residence, he found Christopher assaulting Rowan and then participated in the assault himself. David stated that fearing consequences, they decided to kill her and dispose of her body. In his interview, David claimed that Christopher had handed him the rope and that he had strangled Rowan, saying, "I choke her with it. I realize gone. She's really gone." When presented with David's account, Christopher firmly denied that David had been involved at any point during the crime or its aftermath. This created a complex situation with two individuals admitting involvement but offering contradictory versions of events, based partly on Christopher's statement. Berry County Sheriff Mick Epperly's affidavit to the prosecutor indicated that both men had assaulted Rowan, though it remained unclear who had strangled her. David Spears and Christopher Collings were each charged with statutory rape, forcible rape, and first-degree murder. Sheriff Epperly anticipated additional kidnapping charges against Christopher, but not David, as he was Rowan's legal guardian. Both men were held without bond in the Berry County Jail. During a subsequent jail visit, David's mother Myrna spoke with her son, who again stated that he had participated in the crime, claiming that he had experienced a blackout and his memories were only gradually returning. Myrna, visibly emotional, commented, "He's my one and only. He's all torn up. He really did love her." Meanwhile, Christopher's brother Greg expressed disbelief in his brother's involvement, stating, "I don't believe he could do something like this. He's got 3 kids of his own." Both men appeared in court in Cassville, Berry County, Missouri, 3 days after Rowan's body was discovered. Despite both having admitted participation in the crime, according to investigators, they entered not guilty pleas. Rowan's mother, Colleen, attended court with several family members, while many community members, though grieving and hoping for justice, chose not to attend. One resident explained, "I wanted to, but my heart wouldn't let me. I didn't want to go over there and look at those 2 guys." On November 27th, Colleen filed for divorce. From David Village Mayor Bill Alsop described her as being in a state of shock, saying, "She's numb. She's trying to keep herself busy. She's in there right now on the sewing machine, sewing something for her baby's funeral." The morning before Rowan's funeral, her school planted a pink dogwood tree in her memory, and her classmates released balloons with attached notes. An angel was also placed there, marking her birthday and the day she was found. More than 300 people attended her funeral at Gospel Lighthouse Church, where her favorite hymn, "The Old Rugged Cross," was sung. The pastor encouraged those present to set aside their anger and hatred in the wake of Rowan's death. Both David Spears and Christopher Collings maintained their not guilty pleas. Christopher was bound over for trial after the court found probable cause. Due to the extensive publicity and media attention, David's lawyers successfully requested a change of venue, moving his trial from Berry County to Pulaski County. As the two were being tried separately, this meant their cases would proceed in different courts. Given the complexity of the case, several years would pass before they would go to trial. Then came an unexpected development after consultations with the Attorney General's office and following new evidence from an independent laboratory. The charges of statutory rape, forcible rape, and first-degree murder against David Spears were dropped. Barry County prosecuting attorney Johnny Cox reached a plea agreement with David, who was sentenced to 4 years for hindering prosecution and 7 years for endangering the welfare of a child, both maximum sentences for these offenses. Prosecutor Cox acknowledged the difficulty of this decision, noting that David had initially claimed involvement in the rape and murder shortly after his arrest. Cox stated, "This case has almost consumed the resources of my office for the last 4 years and 10 months. Over the course of that time, his case has been pending evidence, other than his statement has been pursued to be used to prove David Spears was involved in the rape and murder of Rowan Ford. During that time, no additional evidence implicating Mr. Spears has been developed. The analysis and testing of evidence, including a rape test kit examined by the state police lab, the FBI lab, and an independent lab, did not implicate David, and the results were inconsistent with his original statement. Cox also noted inconsistencies in David's claim that he had strangled Rowan. Cox expressed concern about the lack of physical evidence that could be presented in court, creating serious doubts about the reliability of David's statement to law enforcement. He pointed out that Christopher had consistently denied anyone else's involvement in Rowan's murder, from his first interview to his last. Cox, worried about having to argue that Christopher's statement accurately represented events while simultaneously presenting David's contradictory account as truthful. Another concern was that convicting David of the more serious charges might create grounds for both cases to be overturned on appeal. Cox stated, "This type of crime should outrage everyone. I was outraged when I first heard about it. However, as a prosecutor, I am a minister of justice and must do what the law requires, what the facts require, and what fairness and justice require." Sheriff Robert M. Sheriff Evanson supported Cox's decision, noting the absence of physical evidence that would have supported David's conviction, though questions remained about why someone would confess to such a terrible crime without being guilty. Christopher Collings later filed a motion to suppress evidence from all his statements to investigators and evidence taken from his property, trailer, truck, and body. This motion was overruled and his trial proceeded, lasting approximately 1 week. During the trial, his defense team argued that Christopher had experienced significant emotional problems and was unable to form normal emotional attachments due to severe neglect by his parents and trauma from being in foster care. As the youngest of 6 children, all of whom entered the foster care system, due to their parents' criminal activities and substance abuse issues, Christopher had endured a difficult childhood. Though he later became a father, his ongoing struggles with drugs and alcohol caused significant problems. His lawyers maintained that he had never intended to kill Rowan and asked the jury to set aside the disturbing crime scene and autopsy photos, as well as Rowan's age, and focus on the legal aspects and facts which they argued indicated the crime was not premeditated. The court heard testimony from several witnesses, including Colleen Rowan's mother, when asked about the impact of learning that her daughter had been killed. She replied, "Totally devastated myself and my other children." Rowan's sister testified that upon hearing of the murder, she collapsed to the floor, and that everyone in the family experienced deep depression. On March 20th, after the conclusion of the trial, the jury returned their verdict guilty of murder in the first degree. As this was a capital case, the penalty phase was crucial. During this phase, the prosecution presented 6 victim impact statements, while Christopher's defense presented 2 witnesses who testified about David's potential involvement in Rowan's murder. A human development expert testified that Christopher had experienced severe emotional neglect during the first 6 months of his life, which had impaired his development. The expert diagnosed Christopher with severe disorganized associative attachment disorder and intermittent explosive personality disorders, explaining that these conditions affected his ability to form proper connections with others. After the penalty phase concluded, the jury recommended a death sentence. A series of appeals followed. On July 23, 2012, Christopher's lawyers filed a notice of appeal of the death penalty with the Missouri Supreme Court, an automatic process under Missouri law for capital punishment cases. This appeal was denied. In 2014, Christopher appealed his sentence again, seeking reduction to life imprisonment. But this too was rejected. Christopher then filed a writ of habeas corpus with the Missouri Supreme Court, attempting to present evidence that the government had not disclosed that one of their primary witnesses, Wheaton Chief Clinton Clark, had a criminal record from his time serving in Vietnam. The prosecution contended that even if Chief Clark's record had been disclosed, it would not have altered the outcome. Meanwhile, David Spears had served more than 7 years in custody and was released in 2015, shortly after his release but before the end of his probation. He was hired by his trial attorney's husband and worked at the Missouri State Public Defender's Office for a year and 8 months. Since the Public Defender's Office had represented both Christopher and David, Christopher's lawyers argued that David's employment there created a conflict of interest that prevented their client from pleading guilty to lesser charges. In their legal filings, they stated a potential conflict existed. However, because of their divided loyalties or fear of Mr. Collins' response to the conflict, counsel failed to alert the court or alert Mr. Collins of the conflict. Because of this non-disclosure, Mr. Collins himself was not aware of the claim until after his post-conviction proceedings had concluded. A clemency petition was submitted for Christopher, arguing that he suffered from a brain abnormality leading to deficits in awareness, judgment, and deliberation, and noting that he had also been sexually abused as a child. The petition described him as a damaged human being with no guidance on how to grow into a functioning adult. It also referenced David Spears' self-implication and the transcript of his statement to police, where he claimed Christopher had given him the rope and he had ended Rowan's life. The Missouri Supreme Court set December 3rd, 2024 as the execution date for Christopher Collins. His fate was sealed when the United States Supreme Court denied his appeal and Governor Mike Parson rejected his clemency request. Governor Parson, a former sheriff who had overseen 12 previous executions, had never granted clemency. Christopher was scheduled to be executed by lethal injection using the sedative pentobarbital. Newton County Sheriff Chris Jennings, who had worked on the investigation, commented that the execution was a long time coming, adding, "I was hoping the date would come while I was still in office, so I put in a request to attend the execution. I felt like it was the right thing to do for Rowan." However, he acknowledged that there could never be complete justice for her, stating, "I'd like to have seen more done," and some of the rest of the prosecution, but this is how it came out. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad to finally see the date set. On December 3rd, 2024, at 5 54. The execution witnesses were positioned, including 4 members of Christopher's legal team, 4 media representatives, 8 state witnesses, and 2 representatives for Rowan's family. At 6 Subaru p.m., Missouri, Attorney General Andrew Bailey informed the Department of Corrections that there were no remaining legal challenges to proceeding with the execution. 9 minutes later, 49-year-old Christopher Collings was pronounced dead. Christopher had prepared a written statement to be read following his execution. Right or wrong, I accept this situation for what it is. To anyone that I have hurt in this life, I am sorry. I hope you are able to get closure and move on. Regardless which side of this situation that you are on, you are in my prayers, and I hope to see you in heaven one day. After Christopher's execution, Sheriff Jennings expressed his belief that the system had failed Rowan, saying, "Unfortunately, you know there were a lot of hotlines made about her situation, but unfortunately, law enforcement was never called. I'd like to think we would have removed her from that situation if we were aware of it. It is some closure, I suppose, to see this case come to an end. There is some justice. It's only partial justice, but I'll take what I can get." Former Sheriff Mick Epperly reflected that the case had deeply affected Southwest Missouri, describing it as terrible and someone to take a life and throw them down into a cave like a piece of dirt. When asked if justice had been served, he responded, "I think it has. She didn't deserve any of this. It'll give some satisfaction of the family that maybe he got what he deserved." For many involved in this case, the memory of Rowan Ford and the circumstances of her death would remain with them permanently. Sheriff Jennings, with 44 years of experience and numerous homicide investigations, identified this as the case that had affected him most profoundly. "I have Rowan's school ID here. I've carried it in my pocket ever since this incident happened. I'll continue to carry it in my pocket after this," he shared, explaining that her case had influenced how they investigated crimes against children. We work a lot of cases of child abuse and child neglect in Newton County. We always make sure that child safety is of the utmost concern. We hate taking children from homes, but if there's any question at all, we do it. We always think back on this incident here. The impact of Rowan's murder continued to resonate throughout her community. One of her teachers, Todd Holt, who had testified at the trial, couldn't bring himself to clear out her desk for some time after her death. She's the kind of kid that I think every school teacher could want. I mean, she showed up at school, and it was all about work. It was all about what Rowan was going to do to be able to get ahead in life, he recalled. Rowan's best friend? A boy named Tyler and his mother were deeply affected by her loss. Tyler's mother remembered how Rowan's shy nature had helped calm her energetic son when they played together. "It's the closest thing I've known to losing my own child for quite a while. My son couldn't sleep alone. He still talks about her," she shared. For Rowan's older sister, the memories and love for Rowan remained vivid. "I am so proud of the girl she was turning out to be. A part of me died when my sister died." On a quiet suburban street in Ellington, Connecticut, at number 7 Birchview Drive, lived a family of 4. 39-year-old Connie Margada Dabate resided there with her husband, 40-year-old Richard, and their 2 sons. 9-year-old Richard Jr., known to everyone as RJ, and 6-year-old Connor. Originally from Rockville, Connie came from a large, close-knit family. As she grew older, one thing that brought her immense joy was bringing people together. Hosting gatherings and parties for friends and family became something she deeply loved to do. Christmas, New Year's, Halloween. There wasn't a time of year when she wasn't planning some kind of celebration. While many people naturally drift apart after school and college, Connie made sure this didn't happen with her friends. She often organized informal high school reunions to maintain those connections. Her personality was characterized by boundless energy and perpetual cheerfulness. Those who knew her described her as someone who would readily offer advice and support at any time, regardless of how busy her own schedule might be. It was during a summer party that Connie met Richard DeBatey, a computer technician. Some acquaintances noted they might not have naturally paired them together, but they seemed to complement each other well. As people got to know Richard better, they discovered his playful side. He was often described as being like a big kid himself, always trying to make others laugh. Connie certainly shared this quality. When Richard introduced Connie to his parents, his mother immediately recognized there was something special about her. On July 4th, 2003, the couple married and established their family home on that quiet street in Ellington. After having RJ and Connor, Connie's already legendary parties became even more elaborate. She would invest considerable effort in creating the most wonderful costumes, decorations, and props to delight her children. During one particularly memorable Easter celebration, she told the children that if they scattered jelly beans in the garden before going to sleep, they would awaken to find the beans had transformed into lollipops. While the children slept, Connie went outside in the darkness, carefully raked up all the jelly beans, and placed lollipops around the garden for them to discover in the morning. She truly embodied someone who went above and beyond, pouring her whole heart into everything she did, simply because she loved making others happy. No celebration was too small for Connie to transform into something magical. Whether it was a birthday, a holiday, or just a weekend gathering, she approached each occasion with the same enthusiasm and attention to detail. Friends often remarked that receiving an invitation to one of Connie's parties was something to look forward to for weeks. She had a special talent for making everyone feel welcome and included, ensuring no one was left out or forgotten. In their community, the DeBatey home became known as a place of warmth and hospitality. Neighbors would often see Connie in her garden, tending to her flowers or preparing for the next celebration. She greeted everyone with a genuine smile and always had time for a friendly conversation. Despite her busy schedule as a mother and professional, she never seemed rushed or distracted when interacting with others. This genuine interest in people's lives endeared her to everyone she met. December 23, 2015. Just 2 days remained until Christmas. The DeBatey home was festively decorated and presents were already wrapped beneath the tree. Connie was naturally excited about spending the upcoming holiday with her sons. That morning began like many others. Connie helped the boys get ready for school, and Richard drove them there before returning home to change into his work clothes. Connie herself was preparing to attend a spin class. Shortly before 11 in the morning, neighbors living on the quiet street of Birchview Drive were startled by the sound of sirens and emergency vehicles speeding toward the DeBatey residence. Authorities were responding to an activated house alarm and a brief 911 call from the home. Information began circulating that there had been a home invasion at number 7, Birchview Drive. Residents were told that Connie and Richard had been attacked by a masked intruder who had fled the scene. Officers went door to door, checking each home for signs of the intruder, instructing residents to gather their families in one room and remained there until further notice. As the community waited anxiously behind locked doors, the situation at the debate home was revealed to be far worse than initially reported. Richard had been found tied to a chair and bleeding, but was stable enough to be transported to the hospital by ambulance. Connie, however, had been discovered in the basement. She had been shot twice, once in the back of her head and once in her stomach. She was deceased. Detectives assured the neighborhood that the intruder had long since departed the area and residents could safely leave their homes. When people eventually ventured outside, they were met with the sobering sight of yellow police tape, flashing lights, and numerous uniformed officers. The scene was described by one neighbor as absolutely unbelievable, like a storyline in a dark TV show. The timing of the incident, just before Christmas, added a layer of poignancy to the tragedy. Holiday decorations adorned the homes along Birchview Drive, creating a stark contrast with the police presence. Children who should have been looking forward to the excitement of Christmas morning were now confined indoors as their parents tried to make sense of what had happened in their peaceful neighborhood. As officers continued their initial assessment of the scene, neighbors gathered in small groups, sharing what little information they had. Some recalled hearing the sirens, while others mentioned seeing Richard being taken away in an ambulance. No one could quite believe that such violence had intruded upon their quiet community, especially during what should have been a joyful time of year. After Richard received medical treatment, hospital staff informed detectives they could interview him. Though visibly shaken, he provided them with his account of the morning's events. According to Richard, he had left the house at 8:00 a.m. to take the children to school, returning around 8:30 a.m. to change into his work shirt. He saw Connie getting ready for her gym class and noticed her backing her car out of the driveway. She was heading to a spin class at the local YMCA, but the class had been canceled, prompting her immediate return. Richard explained that he had a 40-minute commute to work, but approximately 10 minutes into his drive, he realized he had forgotten his laptop. As he turned back toward home, he received a notification on his phone that the house alarm had been triggered. He sent an email to his supervisor from his phone explaining he would be late as he wanted to make sure everything was all right at home. Upon arriving back home between 8:45 and 9:03 a.m., Richard heard a noise upstairs. He cautiously ascended the stairs and encountered a tall man wearing camouflage clothing and a mask going through Connie's jewelry. The intruder noticed Richard and produced a knife, demanding money, credit cards, and PIN numbers. Richard complied and handed over his wallet. In his statement, Richard described the intruder as tall, approximately 6 feet 2 inches, with a stocky build and a deep voice, comparing him to the actor Vin Diesel. Richard's recollection of subsequent events became somewhat hazy as he stated everything happened very quickly. He heard Connie returning home and called out to warn her to leave instead of escaping. Connie ran to the basement. Richard believed she was trying to reach one of the guns they kept in the house, one stored in a lockbox in the basement, another in their bedroom closet. The intruder pursued Connie downstairs, and Richard heard 2 gunshots at approximately 9:05 a.m. Richard ran down to the basement and found Connie on the floor, deceased, while the intruder held one of their guns. The assailant then stabbed Richard in the legs with a box cutter, secured him to a chair with zip ties, and burned him with a blowtorch. Richard claimed he managed to grab the blowtorch and burn the intruder's face, causing the attacker to flee. Still partially bound to the chair, Richard somehow dragged himself up the stairs to the kitchen to activate the panic button connected to their home security system. He then made a brief 911 call when detectives asked Richard for more specific details about the attacker. He struggled to provide consistent information. At times, he described the assailant's clothing in detail, mentioning specific camouflage patterns, while at other moments, he could only recall that the clothing was dark or military-like. His description of the mask similarly fluctuated between a detailed account of a ski mask with eye holes and a vaguer mention of something covering the intruder's face. Richard explained that after the intruder fled, he remained disoriented for some time before managing to reach the panic button. When asked about the substantial delay between the alleged time of the attack and the emergency call, Richard attributed it to his state of shock and physical discomfort from his injuries. He described feeling dizzy and struggling to navigate the stairs while still partially restrained. The detectives found Richard's account so unusual that they weren't certain where to begin their investigation. They interviewed neighbors and friends of the Debaties seeking any information that might be relevant. Several friends mentioned that in recent months, the couple had experienced issues with a contractor. They weren't satisfied with work done on their home and had sued him for a few $1,000s. Subsequently, one of their cars had its windshield damaged, and Connie suspected the contractor was responsible. She had expressed concern for their safety, which led to Richard purchasing a gun, despite Connie's general apprehension about firearms. Testing confirmed this was the same weapon used in Connie's death. Investigators located the contractor, a man named Ken, who acknowledged that his professional relationship with the Debaties had ended poorly. He admitted feeling frustrated about losing money in the civil suit, but insisted he had moved on from the situation. Ken cooperated fully with the investigation, allowing officers to photograph him and examine his property and electronic devices. He had no criminal record, and his physical characteristics, height, build, and voice, did not match Richard's description of the intruder. Furthermore, for someone who had spent considerable time in the Debate home, it seemed unlikely that Richard wouldn't have recognized him despite the mask. Ken provided a solid alibi and was subsequently eliminated as a suspect. In the week following Christmas, as many prepared to celebrate the new year, Connie's family and friends gathered for her wake. The turnout was substantial, with hundreds of people waiting in line for hours in freezing temperatures to pay their respects. When Connie's two closest friends of 20 years, people who had been frequent visitors to the Debate home and had spent countless occasions with the couple, finally reached Richard in the receiving line, they were taken aback when he asked, "And how do you know my wife?" They exchanged confused glances, but attributed his behavior to the stress of the situation. Later, however, they remarked to each other how strange the interaction had been. Friends were further surprised when Richard departed from Connie's funeral earlier than anyone else. In the days that followed, his behavior continued to raise questions. By many accounts, he appeared unusually cheerful, dining out, having drinks with friends, and hosting gatherings at his home as if nothing had happened. People observed that if you didn't know who he was, you would never guess his wife had been murdered, and he had been brutally attacked just days earlier. As 2 weeks passed without an arrest, the community of Ellington grew increasingly concerned. Local news stations began covering the story more prominently, with reporters interviewing residents about their feelings regarding the unsolved crime. One local business owner, who ran a nail salon where many town residents gathered, remarked that the more time passes without answers, the more the rumor mill seems to churn. She noted that customers frequently asked if she had heard any updates on the case. The town's first selectman, Lori Spielman, attempted to reassure residents by stating she was in regular contact with police and had been told this was an isolated incident posing no ongoing threat to the community. She mentioned that investigators were waiting for a lot of evidence to come back from the labs and wanted to have all their ducks in a row before proceeding further with the case. Despite these assurances, the lack of clarity about what had happened at the debate home left many residents feeling uneasy. Richard, meanwhile, posted messages on social media expressing gratitude for the community's support and stating he was staying strong for his sons. These public statements contrasted with reports of his seemingly carefree social activities contributed to growing speculation about the case among Ellington residents. As the investigation proceeded, several inconsistencies in Richard's account began to emerge. There was no forced entry at the residence, though a basement window was slightly open, which investigators considered as a possible entry point for the alleged intruder. Nothing in the home appeared to be missing or disturbed. Canine units failed to detect any unfamiliar scents in the house. In fact, the first police dog on the scene was primarily drawn to Richard in the ambulance, while subsequent canine units could not pick up any scent trail of an intruder leaving the property. The wallet Richard claimed had been taken from him was found just outside the house, seemingly with all contents intact. The gun used in the shooting had no fingerprints on it, not from the supposed intruder, from Connie, or from Richard. The knife wounds Richard had sustained were determined by medical staff to be superficial. As Richard continued to speak with investigators, his account became increasingly vague and inconsistent. He shifted from stating he had heard Connie being shot to claiming he had witnessed the shooting, to finally saying he neither saw nor heard anything. He told first responders the intruder was still in the house when they arrived, but later told detectives he had watched the attacker leave. He initially stated everything began just before 9:00 a.m., with Connie being shot approximately 5 minutes later. Yet the 911 call wasn't placed until almost 10 to 30 a.m. The day after Connie's death, Christmas Eve, Richard retained a defense attorney. A week later, he filed a claim for Connie's $475,000 life insurance policy and withdrew $93,000 from an investment account in Connie's name. Through digital forensics, investigators discovered evidence that the seemingly perfect marriage had significant underlying problems. In December 2014, Connie had created a note on her iPhone titled, "Why I Want a Divorce." She detailed concerns about Richard's financial irresponsibility, questioned his parenting abilities, and lamented his lack of attention and affection. She wrote, "He takes money from a lot of accounts that don't belong to him, says he's sorry, but takes no responsibility for it. I don't know anything about his day, who he speaks to, or what goes on in his life, other than work. I'm tired of covering for him. I'm tired of lying and acting like things are great when they aren't." In the reasons to stay section of her note, she acknowledged, "People like him when he is in a great mood. He is fun to be around. I still find him attractive. I am myself around him." Investigators also reviewed the security systems in the Debati home. The system included motion sensors and door contacts that registered when doors were opened or closed. The data from these sensors did not align with Richard's account of an intruder moving through the house. Additionally, the basement window that Richard suggested might have been the entry point showed no signs of tampering. and its positioning made it an unlikely access point for someone of the size Richard had described. The medical examiner's report provided further details that contradicted aspects of Richard's story. The trajectory of the bullets and Connie's position when found suggested she had not been running or in a defensive posture when shot. This conflicted with Richard's claim that she had been fleeing from an intruder. Furthermore, the time of death estimated by the medical examiner based on body temperature and other physiological indicators did not align with the timeline Richard had provided. As detectives compiled these inconsistencies, they also noted that Richard's demeanor during interviews had changed markedly over time. During initial conversations, he appeared distraught and emotional, but in subsequent interviews, he seemed more composed and calculated in his responses. He frequently prefaced answers with, "to the best of my recollection," or similar qualifying phrases, which investigators found noteworthy, given the traumatic and memorable nature of the events he was describing. What could possibly motivate Richard to harm his wife? Investigators had been discreetly exploring a significant lead since their very first interview with Richard in the hospital. Richard had been involved in an affair with a woman named Sarah, whom he had known since high school. Connie had also known Sarah. She had even given a reading at Richard and Connie's wedding. Richard and Sarah's relationship had been intermittent over the years, but intensified in May 2015. Just 1 month later, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. During his initial 7-hour interview in the hospital, Richard voluntarily mentioned Sarah admitting to a sexual relationship with her. His explanation, however, was unusual. He claimed Sarah wanted children of her own, but was struggling financially. So she had asked if Richard could be a sperm donor. Due to the expense of medical procedures, they had decided to conceive the conventional way, as Richard phrased it. When detectives asked if Connie knew about this arrangement, Richard replied, "Yes," adding that Connie not only co-signed everything, it was her idea. The investigators found this difficult to believe. This skepticism was reinforced when they learned Richard had told friends the pregnancy was accidental. In a subsequent interview, Richard offered a different narrative. Connie was unable to have another child, but wanted one, so Sarah had offered to carry a baby for them with all 3 adults co-parenting. As investigators continued to press, Richard finally acknowledged that the pregnancy resulted from a months-long affair and that Sarah's pregnancy had not been planned. Richard had been lying to Connie about his whereabouts, claiming to be working late or spending time with friends while professing his love to Sarah and assuring her he was preparing to file for divorce. By the time of Connie's death, Sarah was approximately 8 months pregnant with their daughter. In June 2015, Richard had indeed consulted a divorce attorney, though he never filed any paperwork. His phone contained a text message to Sarah 2 days before Connie's death, promising to leave his wife, followed by another message the next day expressing his love and mentioning they would see each other the following day. Connie's phone revealed an argument between her and Richard on that same day. She had written, "You lied to me, and I am again cleaning up your fucking mess. Great day off, and Merry Christmas," Richard had replied. "It will be a very Merry Christmas." Investigators discovered that Richard had been using a secret credit card to purchase flowers for Sarah Pay for hotel stays and had spent over $1,000 at a strip club. Perhaps most concerning were Richard's internet search history, which included queries for deadly over-the-counter combinations, fast untraceable homemade poison, and tasteless poison easily available. Investigators interviewed several of Sarah's friends and colleagues who confirmed that Sarah had spoken about her relationship with Richard. According to these accounts, Sarah believed Richard was unhappy in his marriage and was taking steps to leave Connie. She had apparently been surprised and disappointed when she discovered Richard had taken Connie on a romantic trip to Vermont, as he had told Sarah he was working during that period. When Sarah saw photographs of the trip on Connie's Facebook page, she confronted Richard about his dishonesty. Sarah's communications with Richard became increasingly strained as her pregnancy progressed. Text messages recovered from her phone showed she had expressed concern about Richard's commitment to their relationship and questioned whether he was genuinely planning to leave Connie. In one exchange, Sarah had written that she wasn't sure she could continue living in limbo and needed Richard to make a definitive choice about their future. As investigators pieced together these relationships, they developed a clearer picture of the pressure Richard was experiencing from multiple directions. His financial situation was increasingly precarious due to his secret spending. Connie was becoming more aware of his deceptions, and Sarah was expecting greater commitment as the birth of their child approached. These converging pressures appeared to be reaching a critical point in the days leading up to Connie's death. As the investigation continued through 2016 and into the spring of 2017, a crucial piece of evidence emerged. Connie, who was physically active, regularly wore a Fitbit. She had it on the day she died. The data from her Fitbit presented a timeline that contradicted Richard's account in several significant ways. Investigators already knew Richard had waited over an hour before calling 911, which could potentially be attributed to trauma and confusion about the timing of events. However, by combining Connie's Fitbit data with CCTV footage, computer records, and home alarm system logs, a very different sequence of the morning's events was revealed. At 8:26 and 8:27 a.m., Richard was actively using Facebook on his home computer, precisely when he claimed to be driving to work. At 8:41 a.m., someone logged into Outlook.com from Richard's computer. Between 8:45 and 9:00 a.m., the time Richard said he returned home to encounter the intruder, Connie's Fitbit showed her leaving for her spin class at 8:46 a.m. 1 minute later, Richard logged into the home alarm system, attempting to disarm it successfully. Doing so at 8:50 a.m., then rearming it again. 9 minutes after that, Richard disarmed the alarm for a second time using his keychain fob at 8:53 a.m. Connie arrived at the fitness facility. A few minutes later, she sent a Facebook message to her therapist. At 9:04 a.m., Richard sent an email to his supervisor at work. He claimed to have sent this while pulled over in his car, but the email was traced to the home's IP address at 9:08 a.m. Connie left the fitness center and returned to her car. 10 minutes later, Richard was browsing the Indian Valley YMCA website, where Connie had gone for her class. At 9:23 a.m., Connie's Fitbit registered activity when the home's garage door opened. Between 9:40 and 9:46 a.m., she was active on Facebook. At 10:05 a.m., Connie's Fitbit recorded her final movements, and at 10:12 a.m., the panic alarm for the home security system was activated from Richard's keychain fob. This digital evidence demonstrated that Connie was alive and active for approximately an hour after Richard claimed she had died. Nothing in the technical data aligned with his story. Richard hadn't left the house as he claimed. None of the timings matched his account, and Connie's movements and heart rate never indicated she was fleeing from an intruder. The Fitbit data was particularly compelling because it provided an objective, time-stamped record of Connie's movements and activity levels throughout the morning. The device measured heart rate, steps taken, and general movement patterns, creating a detailed log that forensic analysts could interpret. This information showed that Connie had engaged in normal, non-distressed activity until her final movements at 10:05 a.m., significantly later than the time Richard claimed she had been confronted by an intruder. Investigators also examined CCTV footage from the YMCA, where Connie had attempted to attend her spin class. The footage confirmed her arrival and departure times, corroborating the Fitbit data. Additional cameras in the area captured her car traveling along routes that matched the timeline established by the electronic evidence. The IP address analysis of Richard's computer activity was equally significant. By examining the digital signatures of his online activities, Facebook usage, email correspondence, website browsing, forensic technicians could establish that these actions had been performed from the home network. This directly contradicted Richard's claim that he had been driving to work during several of these time periods. The home security system provided another layer of verification. Each time, the system was armed or disarmed. A timestamp was recorded in the company's database. The pattern of arming and disarming, particularly when correlated with the garage door opening in Connie's return home, created a sequence of events that was inconsistent with Richard's narrative of an intruder entering the home and confronting him around 9:30 a.m. The compilation of this electronic evidence was methodical and comprehensive, addressing potential alternative explanations and technical limitations. The investigators consulted with specialists in each type of technology to ensure their interpretations were sound and would withstand scrutiny in court. By the spring of 2017, they had assembled what they believed was an irrefutable technical case that disproved Richard's version of events. In April 2017, Richard was arrested and charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and providing false statements to the police. He posted his $1 million bail and remained free while awaiting trial, during which time he continued to co-parent the child he had with Sarah. In 2019, Connie's father passed away after a prolonged illness. Family members said he had been determined to live long enough to see justice for his daughter, but his health ultimately failed, and he died before seeing her killer brought to trial. Richard's trial was originally scheduled for April 2020, but the COVID-19 pandemic and the passing of Richard's attorney resulted in significant delays. Finally, in April 2022, more than 6 years after Connie's death, the trial commenced. The proceedings included 600 pieces of evidence and testimony from over 130 witnesses, including Richard himself. His defense team argued that investigators had developed tunnel vision from the beginning, focusing exclusively on Richard and working backwards to make their timeline fit the hypothesis of his guilt. However, the prosecution countered this by noting that police had thoroughly investigated every lead Richard provided, including the contractor, before ruling out all other potential suspects. The prosecution described Richard as a ticking time bomb who had cornered himself. They suggested he killed Connie because he feared a divorce would damage his reputation and social connections. He was also concerned about the financial consequences of divorce and the complications of custody arrangements for RJ and Connor. Connie's sister testified that Richard showed no emotion when he explained to the family what had happened. Richard took the stand in his own defense, acknowledging that he had been in love with both women and felt trapped. He admitted to the affair, but maintained that this did not make him a murderer, stating he missed Connie every day. and would never do something so harmful to his sons. Sarah also testified, stating she never intended to cause the breakup of the DeBate family. She explained she had been willing to raise her daughter independently, without even listing Richard on the birth certificate if he chose to remain with Connie. She expressed remorse and embarrassment about the situation, but emphasized she had never pressured Richard to leave his wife, nor had they ever discussed harming Connie. During the trial, prosecutors presented the digital evidence in painstaking detail, calling experts from Fitbit, the home security company, and forensic computer analysts to explain the significance of the electronic trail. They constructed a visual timeline that juxtaposed Richard's statements with the digital record, highlighting the contradictions. The defense attempted to challenge the reliability of the electronic evidence, suggesting that timestamps could be inaccurate or that devices might have malfunctioned. But these arguments failed to persuade the jury. Medical experts testified about the nature of Richard's injuries, describing them as consistent with self-infliction rather than an attack by an intruder. They noted the superficial quality of the wounds and their placement in accessible areas of his body. Forensic specialists explained that the absence of fingerprints on the gun, including Richard's own, suggested it had been wiped clean after use, and action inconsistent with an intruder hastily fleeing the scene. Police officers who had responded to the scene described their initial impressions and the inconsistencies they had noticed in Richard's behavior and the physical evidence. They testified about the absence of signs of struggle in the house, the curious behavior of the police dogs, and the clean, undisturbed nature of most of the residents, despite the alleged violent intrusion. The prosecution also introduced financial evidence showing Richard's precarious monetary situation and his attempts to access Connie's accounts and insurance policy immediately after her death. They argued that this financial motivation, combined with the pressure of his dual relationships, created a perfect storm that led to violence. The defense presented character witnesses who spoke to Richard's reputation as a loving father and community member. They emphasized the lack of prior violent behavior in his history and suggested that while he may have been a flawed husband, this did not make him capable of murder. They also introduced testimony about possible alternative suspects and scenarios, though none withstood scrutiny under cross-examination. After 5 weeks of testimony, both legal teams concluded their presentations. In May 2022, the jury found Richard guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 65 years in prison, describing the crime as brutal, calculated, and incomprehensible. Before being taken into custody, Richard stated, "I am here before you as an innocent man. I will never stop fighting for justice for my wife Connie, who I think about every single day." Richard's parents continued to believe in his innocence, finding it difficult to accept that he would harm Connie, particularly 2 days before Christmas, and then proceed with his life as if nothing had happened. In October 2024, Richard appealed his conviction, claiming prosecutorial misconduct. His defense attorney argued that the prosecutor had engaged in inappropriate behavior that denied Richard a fair trial. At the time of this recording, the appeal remains under consideration by the Connecticut Supreme Court. The reverberations of Connie's death and Richard's conviction continue to affect many lives, particularly those of her children. Connie's sister Leslie now raises RJ and Connor, who are gradually coming to terms with the painful reality of their father's actions. Due to Richard's fabricated story of a home invasion, The boys lived with an underlying fear that a stranger might break into their home, an unnecessary anxiety that compounded their trauma. The community of Ellington has slowly healed from the shock of having such violence occur in their midst. The house on Birchview Drive, once known for Connie's welcoming gatherings, stands as a quiet reminder of the events of that December morning. Neighbors have created memorial gardens and community events in Connie's honor, attempting to reclaim her legacy of bringing people together. Rather than allowing the tragedy to define their neighborhood, Sarah and her daughter have established a life separate from the shadow of Richard's crime. According to those close to the situation, she has been forthright with her child about the circumstances of her birth, while protecting her from unnecessary details of the case. Sarah has expressed her intention to ensure the child knows about Connie's kindness and the positive impact she had on those around her. Connie's mother often reflects on her last phone conversation with her daughter, which began with Connie saying, "Mom, I love you. You're my best friend." This, she feels, encapsulated Connie's essence, a kind, caring person who consistently made others feel special and valued. She cherishes this memory, finding comfort in the knowledge that her final interaction with her daughter was filled with such affection. For the investigators who worked tirelessly on the case, the conviction brought professional satisfaction, but also a sense of sadness that their work could not bring Connie back to her family. The lead detective later remarked that cases like Connie's stay with investigators long after the legal proceedings conclude, particularly when they involve someone who is so beloved in their community. The case has been noted in legal and forensic circles for its pioneering use of Fitbit data as evidence in a murder trial. It has since been referenced in other cases involving digital forensics, highlighting how our increasingly connected devices can provide crucial information in criminal investigations. Legal experts have discussed the implications for privacy and the admissibility of such evidence while acknowledging its value in establishing objective timelines. For Connie's friends, the loss remains profound. Her best friend, Kim, expressed what many felt. "I miss her laughter. I miss the way she would make me feel. I miss how much fun she was, and how much life she brought into me and others that she was around. Everything. I miss every single thing about her." As years pass, those who knew Connie work to preserve her memory, not through the lens of how she died, but through celebrations of how she lived. Annual charitable events in her name focus on supporting families and creating the kind of joyful community gatherings she valued. Her friends speak to her sons about their mother's capacity for making everyday moments special, ensuring they know the fullness of who she was, beyond the tragedy that took her from them. In the quiet moments, those who loved Connie remember her enthusiastic approach to life, her generous spirit, and her talent for making everyone around her feel significant. The story of the investigation and trial will eventually fade into legal archives, but the warmth and vitality Connie brought to her corner of the world continues to resonate with all who knew her. The quiet street in Ellington continues on the seasons, passing in their eternal cycle. Spring brings flowers to gardens Connie once tended summer evenings, echo with children's laughter. Autumn leaves gather on lawns, and winter snow blankets the rooftops. Life moves forward, changed, but enduring, carrying with it the memories of a woman who understood the profound importance of making each day meaningful for those she loved.